Welcome to another lesson of Nicantlaka University. Today's topic will be Nicantlaka people in educational institutions. Nicantlaka University is a free online resource for people of Mexican, Central American, Native American, and South American descent who seek to decolonize, educate, and liberate themselves from white supremacy. Today we will explore the theme of Native Americans and the role in early American history. The comprehensive question that we're asking is, in what ways has scholarship on Native American history become part of the mainstream historiography of early American history? Nicantlaka and early American historiography. To begin, let us revisit some of the earlier textbooks. The first one that we're going to look at was The American People by Musi. This textbook was published in 1927. When it referred to indigenous people, these are the ways in which our ancestors were described. North and South America contained, quote, a wilderness of tribes of copper-colored barbarians or savages. Other tribes were sunk in bestial savagery. It was for the European settlers to introduce civilization into the New World. They have contributed almost nothing to the making of America. Virgin continent for the European discoverers to make of it what they would. That was from 1927, History of the American People. Let us look a few decades later, 1966, from quotes from the American Pageant. The vast and virgin continent, so sparsely peopled by Indians that they could be eliminated or pushed aside. Now let's look at its history textbook from the year 2000. Quote, over 72 million people inhabited the two American continents. Talented mathematicians, human sacrifices, cutting the hearts out. Native Americans did not lay heavy hands on the continent because they were so few in number. If you notice, there's a thread of diminishing the population that was here upon the time of the European invasion. They always make it seem like we did nothing with the land, there were so few of us, that everything that's written is to apologize and to explain and validate what happened to us after 1492. They don't want to humanize and they don't want to give us our full capacity as far as the population because they always want to justify why they're still on our continent. Now we will look at some of the scholarly journals written on Native American history. The examples of first and last articles published referencing Indian, Red, Native American, or Indigenous. I took a look at 3 major historical journals to see what was the very first article published on Native peoples and what was the very last article published on Native peoples. I wanted to see if there was any changes, if the language had changed, and what type of topics they were talking about in regards to studying the history of our people. For example, in the William and Mary Quarterly Journal, the very first journal that I found containing the concepts of indigenous was in their first volume in January of 1944. The title of the article was Indian Policy in Early Virginia. The very recent article in April 2017 was There's No Such Thing as Prehistory, What the Longue Durée of Gado and Pueblo History Tells Us About Colonial America by Juliana Barr. The next journal that I looked at was Reviews in American History. The very first article that they wrote referencing people and early peoples of the Americas was As God Gold Was with the Spaniards, Red, White, and Black, the Peoples of Early America. And the most recent article published by Reviews in American History was Indigenous History in Imperial America, American Indian History, Today and Tomorrow. And the last example that we're looking at is the Journal of Early Republic. The earliest mentioning of indigenous people was in their 6th volume of 1986. The General Charles Scott, the Kentucky Mounted Volunteers, and the Northwest Indian Wars. The most recent article published in that journal regarding indigenous history is Scientific Instructions in Native American Linguistics in the Imperial United States, the Departments of War, 1826, vocabulary. As we can see, there was very vague references to indigenous people, and now there are some steps closer into understanding our culture, history, and even linguistics. But how much of this historiography, how much of this research is actually making it to our textbooks? Let's look at another example of how much of these topics are being written throughout these journals. How many articles were published about Nicantlaka indigenous history in three major journals in the last 5 years? As we can see, the numbers vary. The highest number was the William and Mary Quarterly Journal of 6. The lowest number has been 1. However, the one I will say documented and published more articles on our people was actually the Journal of Early Republic. Why? Because that actual journal publishes very few articles every time they publish on any type of topic. And I did notice that many of their articles did represent a good chunk of Indigenous history. Of course, this is not enough, but this is to reflect on the state of academia in regards to our history today. Let us go back and look at history textbook with a more contemporary interest. I took a look at a 2014 current Paramount High School textbook, and this is the latest on how they describe Indigenous people and European invasions. Quote, large-scale European expansion often had negative side effects for the indigenous peoples, including war, disease, and cultural devastation. This was in 2014. So we're looking at the concepts or looking at the language being used to refer to our people. They're talking about indigenous people. They're trying to say that there was some type of negative effect due to the European invasion. But still, it does not give a full scope, a full view of what it meant to be an indigenous people. And none of these books reference the killing of 95% of our population and the destruction of our culture, civilization, and heritage. Now let's take a look at academia as far as what will be published soon. What are they interested in? What is being explored at the academic level, higher learning, higher institutions, universities? In 2018, I'm going to give you an example of 2 upcoming books. The first one is Our Beloved Kin, A New History of King Philip's War. This book, it's about uncovering the story of war, captivity, and resistance within the First Indian War by focusing and analyzing landscape and tribal relations. It's very interesting because in this book, she's actually mentioning one of the women native leaders in that area. And secondly, we're looking at The Sea is My Country, The Maritime World of the Meccas. This is for the quote, the first full-scale history of the Makah people of the Pacific Northwest. Those culture and identity are closely bound to the sea. This is some of the contemporary examples of works that are yet to be published in the next coming year. Let's take a look at how we are being perceived in mainstream education and in the news. As we have seen, many of our people are protesting the censoring of U.S. history when it comes to describing the indigenous experience. Let us not forget that just a few days ago, the actual dictator, Nazi settler Trump, he actually insulted our people in front of an Andrew Jackson portrait, as he called other people from Congress Pocahontas. This is a state of this colonial country. Look at how they ridicule our people. Some of the examples that you see here are some of the articles that have been published in regards to our people protesting the complete erasing of our indigenous pain in our indigenous survival and our resistance. But all of this has a history. This didn't just start with Trump and this alt-right and crazy Republican Nazis. There is a specific history to destroying indigenous knowledge. We can go as far back as 1554. Europeans destroyed the foundations of our civilizations by burning our books, universities, and killing our leadership. We must decolonize and reclaim our Nicantlaca history, heritage, and identity. This was an actual law that passed, in which the King of Spain wrote a decree calling for the destruction of indigenous knowledge in the ways of life of our people. This particular drawing here comes from 1554. As you can see, they are destroying images, art, anything having to do with indigenous culture, identity, and heritage. Some of the books that we recommend are the following. Mexico by Michael D. Coe. This is more of an archaeological anthropological book, but it gives a pretty good summary of the history of Mexico at the time that it was published. It gets into the origins of civilization, the great accomplishments, and much more detail as according to the major civilizations at that time. Another great book is American Indian Contributions to the World. This is an A through Z encyclopedia detailing the various accomplishments in various fields of knowledge that our ancestors gave the world. It is a beautiful book. I recommend that you read it with your young ones, with your cousins, with your neighbors. It's beautiful. The third book that we recommend is The Conquest of the New World, American Holocaust by David E. Stannard. Get ready to learn the truth of the genocide. He argues that 95% of our population was wiped out, that over 100 million of our ancestors were killed. He uses the primary sources based on the writings of Europeans themselves, looking at different graphics, different images, looking at the actual letters of Columbus and Cortez, and making the connection to contemporary times, how the genocide has not ended. And lastly, the other book that we want to recommend is The Other Slavery, The Uncovered Story of Indian Enslavement in America by Andrés Reséndez. This book was published last year in 2016. And although all of these books have their flaws, I will say that this book actually really thoroughly investigates the enslavement of our people and how it was able to exist for centuries after being deemed illegal by the Spanish crown. Either of these books would be a great introduction into learning part of our history. Our history is difficult. 5 centuries of colonization and white supremacy make it really hard to decipher through this matrix of lies and Eurocentricity. But there are books out there that we can begin to read and slowly, very slowly, begin to cleanse ourselves of these lies of white supremacy. I welcome you to read these books, make questions, share, and most importantly, continue studying and decolonizing. Thank you very much for listening to this lesson on Nicantlaca University. Learn more by visiting our various pages on Facebook under Nicantlaca University, Nicantlaca Women Warriors, and our YouTube channels, Nicantlaca Women Warriors and Nicantlaca University. This is Citlalli. Thank you for your attention. Let's decolonize, let's educate, and let's liberate.